You're never going to be fully ready for your physical fitness test, but you have to start training and preparing at some point. If for some reason you failed your last one or you're recovering from injury and you realize the gap between you being able to pass and your current state of health is really wide, what are the basics that you need to have inside your training program so that way you can begin and start the process of getting back up to where you need to be? That's what we're going to be covering in this video. We're going to be going over 6 movements, the 6 basic movements that whether you're recovering, you failed, or for whatever reason you're behind of where you should be, you can start the process and climb back up to where you need to be at. The first movement that I will name, explain, and demonstrate is going to be the hinge. In order to perform the hinge, you need to be standing straight up with your heels stacked directly underneath your hips, toes pointing straight ahead. As far as your knees, you need to have them slightly bent, what's referred to as soft knees. They're not going to be locked out. As we move up to the hips, hips are going to be stacked in line with your knees and your shoulders. Hips are also going to be pressed forward. As we move up to our stomach, we want to have our upper ribs tucked down, so that way we've pulled our rib cage a little bit forward. This way we're going to put a lot of tension into our abs and equalize the force between our front abs and our low back. We should be holding a pole with both hands. You want to have your pointer fingers outside of your shoulders whenever you're holding onto it with your thumbs around the bar. Have this bar pressed into your thighs so that way your hips are pressing against the bar and your arms are pressing the bar back into you. This does a very good job of activating your back. Along with having your ribs tucked down, your abs are activated and pressing that bar. This is going to ensure that your spine's moving as a singular unit whenever you're performing the hinge. As to your head position, keep your eyeballs in line with your collarbones. So as your body position moves, your head position will stay with your collarbones, eyes staying in line with them. This is going to be the starting position. There's one last note that I want to cover before we go into this. Note! Breathing. Breathing matters throughout all these reps whenever we're doing this. Go ahead and start programming in correct breathing patterns now whenever you have zero stress and intensity placed against your body to perform these. That way as you progress on in your training and you reach the point where you are able to apply higher amounts of stress and intensity against your body, you've already learned proper breathing techniques into that. What is proper breathing techniques? Well, anytime that you are lengthening a muscle, you want to be breathing in. Anytime that you are shortening a muscle, you want to be blowing out. Here at the starting position, we're going to be lengthening the muscles of our hip or our glutes. So as we're doing that, we want to be breathing in as we're rotating at the hips and bringing our upper body down to a point where our upper back is parallel to the marching surface. As you're traveling down, that bar that you had pressed against your thighs, allow it to travel down to the point where it reaches your knees. This is a transition point. Once that bar has reached your knees, then you can start having your knees to also bend with your hips and still continue to allow your upper body to transition down. Once you reach the bottom position in your hinge, now you're ready to start going back up. As you're going back up, you're going to be blowing out and raising that bar, keeping it against your legs. Once it transitions over your knees, this is the point where once again we will no longer be bending our knees at all. The knees should be relatively back to the starting position. But we will continue to flex at the hips, pushing them forward and raising our upper body back to the starting position. Whenever we're standing straight up, that's the position where once again our hips are in between our knees and our shoulders, pressed against that bar, and that bar is pressing back against our hips. This is the starting position. We can work these reps in over and over again at our pace, at our rhythm, practicing our own breathing technique until we have good mastery and grasp of this movement. Then we can start progressing on to other trainings. There are other movements that you need to ensure that you have good mastery and a grasp of before you start moving on. The next movement that I will name, explain, and demonstrate is going to be the squat. In order to perform the squat, starting at the ground, we're going to have our feet now out at shoulder width apart. So our heels are a little bit wider than whenever we were at the hinge. We're also going to have our toes pointed out away from our body. Everybody's going to be slightly different to whenever we say toes pointed out from our body, whether they're pointed off at 45 degrees or if they're more back towards that 90. Find the one that's best suited for you, but your knees should match your toes as far as being able to point out. Moving on up to our knees, they should be soft again, not fully locked out. Up to our hips, same starting position to where they're stacked in between of our knees and our shoulders. Our stomach, rather than tucking our upper rib down, we're going to be trying to suck our belly button into our low back, making sure our lower abs are good and tight. This time with the bar that we were holding, or the wooden dowel, we're going to widen our grip and bring it over top of our head and put it on the top of the back of our neck. That's where we're going to have our hand position out. Don't feel like your hands need to stay fixed and rigid where they're at. Allow them to slide out to wherever they're comfortable. If you lack the shoulder mobility to be able to bring that bar behind your neck, you can have it stacked in front of you, but make sure that you've constructed a good platform for the weight to sit on. We're practicing squatting as if we're going to be adding weight to the body at a later date. So we need to go ahead and develop the good practices now in order for us to do that. The head position will be the same to where once again our eyeballs will be following our collarbones through all these movements. This is the starting position. Whenever we're ready to begin movement, we're going to start with 3 joints. They're going to be our hips, our knees, and our ankles. All three of these joints will have to have some mobility in them in order for us to perform the squat. We're going to be slightly pushing our hips back, bending at the knees, and allow our knees to travel forward from the ankles as our hips drop down to the ground. The recommendation I like to give to people whenever they're starting and learning how to squat is to try to bring your hips down towards your heels. Does your knees need to travel over top of your toes whenever you're squatting? This depends on your experience level with the squat. The first rule that I want to tell you on it is don't try to force mobility where it's not at. Allow your body to gain that mobility and to gain that comfort whenever you're doing this. If as you're progressing you start to realize that you're not getting any more mobility with that joint as far as your knees being able to travel over your ankles or inside of your hips, that's a sign that something structurally may be wrong that may require professional attention. But at least you know what those markers are and what you need to pay attention to. As we're squatting down, whenever we reach that bottom position, your upper legs may not be fully parallel to the ground. But once again, go through your range of motion. Do not force mobility that's not there. Go all the way down, stop, and hold that bottom position for just 1 to 2 heartbeats. Then once again, have your ankles, knees, and hips go back through their path of travel till they've reached that starting position with your hips pressed all the way forward. Whenever you're doing the squat and the hinge, ensure that whenever you've reached the top or the bottom of your movement, you've stopped and gave yourself 1 to 2 seconds to stop momentum and to concentrate on that starting position. To go through your breathing techniques before you start to move back up or down. Make sure that you have that inside of it. Whenever you're learning the hinge or the squat, it is not a race. You're learning to teach your body how you want to move whenever you're training and exercising at a later date. Moving on to the next movement, we're going to be doing push maneuvers. As you're doing push, understand that you can do it vertically or horizontally. I'm going to be teaching you a horizontal push, which is also commonly referred to as the push-up. In order to perform the push-up, the starting position has you down on the ground, hands on the ground, and you're going to start with your knees on the ground. As we go into the starting position, you're going to take and put your toes in the dirt and put as much of your body's weight into your heels as you can. Moving on up, our knees are nice or locked whenever we're doing this. Because we loaded all that weight up into our heels, that's going to make it a whole lot easier for us to squeeze our glutes and our stomach and make sure that we don't have that drop in our low back. Weight in the heels, glutes are tight, stomach's tight, so that way we're able to maintain that nice straight line all the way up to our shoulders. Our shoulders are stacked over top of our hands. The key points I like to give people is whenever our hands are down on the ground, we want to have our fingers slightly pointed out. Align your body so that your shoulder joint is going to come down in between your pointer finger and your thumb, the little cup that you see there in front of you. That's where you want your shoulder joint to travel down in front of you. Generally, I also like to recommend that you have your wrists slightly in front of your body, but not to the extent that you're changing the body's natural movement pattern. Once again, your head and eyes are in line with your collarbones, and this is the starting position. Whenever you're ready to begin this movement, you're going to make sure your stomach's tight, glutes tight, and start bending at the elbow and lowering your shoulder down towards your hand back towards that little cup. On your way down, allow your elbow to travel out at a natural 45-degree angles. What does this mean? We don't want our elbows all the way up at a 90-degree angle. We also don't want our elbows shoved down against our body. But think of this as maximized control, maximized power. We want to find a good balance in between the two. That's what you're looking for. Very similar to whenever we said everybody's going to have a different angle to have how they're going to have their knees and toes pointed out whenever they're squatting. Everybody's going to have a different angle for where their elbow needs to be whenever they're performing the push-up. You're looking to maximize both control and power, so somewhere in between is where you need to be. But roughly 45 degrees off from the body is where your elbow should be whenever you're all the way down at the bottom position for the push-up. Whenever you're all the way down and your muscles are fully lengthened, as you begin to push yourself back up as a singular unit, you're going to be blowing out and extending out your elbow until it's good and locked out. Your shoulders, hips, and knees should all move together whenever you're doing this. If you find this too difficult, you may drop to your knees in order to do the push-up. But whenever you do so, remember that now instead of your feet being the angle that you're trying to have everything aligned with, now it's going to move to your knees. So make sure that your knees, hips, and shoulders are all in good alignment as you're performing the push-up. There will be a change in resistance whenever you drop to your knees, so make sure that you're making that correct adjustment for it. Moving on to the next movement, you're going to be going over a pull movement, something that you're going to be pulling towards your body. This is a very effective movement that we need to have in front of it, and the first thing that comes to a lot of people's mind whenever we talk about doing the pulling movement is going to be the pull-up. But if you're watching a video on how to start training for a PT test, there's a good chance that the muscular strength and connections in order to do a pull-up aren't quite there yet. So let's start with something that you can better handle. We're going to be doing a reverse push-up. What is a reverse push-up? Find a good structure that can support your whole body's weight that you can hold on to without fear of tipping over. This may be 2 chairs, a table. In this case, I'll be utilizing a barbell against a rack. We're going to be laying flat on the ground. We're going to raise both hands up and reach up and have a double overhand grip, grab onto the bar in front of us. Make sure that your pointer fingers are in line with your shoulder joint whenever you grab a hold of it. You don't have to keep your stomach good and tight. You can still have your glutes on the ground as you come up and grab a hold of this bar. After both hands are good and secure in their grip, go ahead and squeeze your stomach in your glute and make your body as a straight line, very similar to whenever we were doing the push-up, to where your feet, hips, and shoulders are all in a good straight line. Once you're there, you're going to begin pulling your chest up towards your hands. With your thumbs around, you're going to go ahead and blow out, pull your chest up to your hands, and push your elbows back in that same path to what you used whenever you were doing the pushing maneuver. The muscles of your back and your arms will now begin pulling all the way through until your chest comes up to the high point. Once you're at that high point, a recommendation to you is to try to hold it here for 2 heartbeats, and then begin lowering yourself back down in a controlled manner. Once you reach that bottom position, you may now either drop your hips down to the ground and release from the bar, or you can get more reps in, whichever one you're more comfortable with. But take the time, make sure that you're training your body how to do these pull maneuvers correctly now, so whenever you're trying to move on to get a pull up, you've built the neural pathways in order for your body to be comfortable pulling and moving your whole body's weight. The next movement that we'll be talking about is rotation. Whenever we talk about rotation, we're actually referring to it in 3 different planes. The first plane is our ability to bring our shoulders down towards our knees. That requires rotation at our core or at our stomach in order to perform this movement. The next movement that we'll be talking about is the ability to rotate our shoulders across our hips, back and forth. This is also an element that we need to train whenever we talk about training for rotation. The last one is the ability to resist this force. So making sure that there's some type of training that you have inside your program to resist your body wanting to bring your shoulders down toward your knees, or resist your body wanting to rotate at its core. Make sure that all 3 of these planes are addressed inside your training program. The element that I like to use to start people off with is what we refer to as gun sight sit-ups. In order to perform this, you're going to need some type of weight that your body can hold on to. Make sure it's something that won't fall apart as you're utilizing it. It can be a kettlebell, a milk jug full of water, a big rock, whatever you can find. You're going to be sitting down on the ground with your heels down and holding whatever the object is in your lap. Setting up, looking straight ahead of you. Before you begin this movement, with your feet together, find a fixed point that you can align through your feet that you're going to try to keep that sight on throughout this whole movement. Once you have that, you're going to go ahead and start rotating to either your left or right and try to bring that weighted object down to what touches the ground. Don't feel like it needs to if that range of motion isn't there, but as you're doing that, don't allow your head or foot position to change the gun sight that you've already set. Once you've reached that position to where you went as far to your left or right as you can, come back to that middle point and make sure that you're keeping your head and feet fixed on that sight that you already set, and then start transitioning over to the other side. Once again, if it can touch the ground, great. If not, that's fine, but don't let your gun sight come off while you're performing this. This is not a rush speed maneuver. Instead, try to maintain control while you're doing this, and make sure that you keep your sight set on whatever you picked at the start. The last movement that we're going to be going over is the carry, and this is the first of the complex movements that we've actually started to deal with. Whenever you're performing the carry, this is really a test of the breathing and bracing techniques that you've developed through all these other movement techniques. You're going to once again need some type of weight that you can actually hold with your hand, but make sure it's not something that's so heavy to the point that requires you to lean to the side that you're carrying it on. Before you begin this, you're going to hinge down, pick up the weight, and stand up straight, going back to the starting position for the hinge. Before you take your step with the carry, let's go through the breathing techniques that we covered at the start. You're going to take a big breath in and bring your stomach back down, tucking your upper ribs down and making sure your stomach's secure. Practicing that breathing and bracing that we've talked about through all these drills. Once you're there, take a step forward with the foot that's farthest away from whatever you're carrying, 3 to 6 inch step. Once that foot's down on the ground, then bring the other foot forward. Try not to swing with your hips and shoulders as you're doing that. The weight should not affect your ability to take this step. That's the goal that we're looking for. After both your feet are back to the starting position, once again, breathe and brace, and then take a step with the far foot and then the foot closest to the weight. Whenever you reach the end point, go ahead and set the weight down and make sure that you're getting equal training on both sides whenever you're doing this. Regardless of whether you're doing steps or time, make sure that you're getting equal training on both sides. It's very vital to this. Once again, this is a test of your ability to breathe and brace that we practice throughout all these basic movements. The goal of this video was to provide you the basics that you need to know in order to start training to get ready for your next PT test. All the knowledge that you were giving here is meant to be a base plate for you to be able to continue to learn and grow and train and get better and push yourself, so that way you're able to pass the PT test required for the profession that you want. As a drill sergeant, teaching the basics was something that we became masters of, ensuring that people had a good grasp and understanding of the basics before they move forward in training. And the one thing that drill sergeants hate more than anything else is the excuse. The goal of this video was to eliminate the excuse of I don't know what to do for why you haven't started yet. My name is Benjamin Morris. I'm a tactical strength and conditioning facilitator, military master fitness trainer, and a master resilience instructor. I'm a drill sergeant with 10 cycles completed, and preceding my name anywhere I go is the title Pacific Best Warrior. I thank you very much for your time, and out.